Hey guys, I'm Abhisek, a tutor at the Oxford Group. In today's video, I'll be giving you some general advice for medicine interviews at Oxford and Cambridge University, as well as going through some mock questions and discussing how to answer them. So just my general background, I'm in my third year of medicine at the University of Oxford, and I'm currently in my final honours school year, which is kind of like an equivalent to an intercalation year at other universities. So Oxford and Cambridge does it differently, but at Oxford essentially what that is a year where you get to really focus on your own interests and you have a bunch of different modules you can pick from. I personally am focusing on neurology and pharmacology at the moment and a tiny bit of cancer, but everyone chooses something different, which is why this year is so interesting. But aside from that, preparation for Oxbridge, which is what you guys are interested in. So the majority of the preparation really does take place, for me anyway, it took place quite last minute. So in the summer, after year 12, that's when I was getting a big bulk of my research done, looking into different books, preparing a personal statement obviously, and big preparation for the entrance exam, which is the BMAT in my time, but will be something different for you guys, which hasn't been confirmed at the moment, but I reckon it might either be the UCAT or another entrance exam that Oxford and Cambridge are going to make themselves, and we'll see when that comes out. But preparing for that, and obviously preparing for the interviews as well, which hopefully this video should help with. But again, everyone has their own different timelines. I know some people who've been preparing for much longer than that, some people that put in much less preparation than that and still got the interview offers. So it's completely different for everyone, and you need to do what you're most comfortable with and what fits with your schedule. But I would definitely recommend getting started definitely in the summer at least, and building up a big bulk of resources and having a lot of different pieces of information that you can utilize both for your personal statement and your interviews as well. So the interviews themselves, they vary from college to college, but they also vary from university to university. From my experience at Oxford, these interviews tended to be 20 to 30 minutes long. But again, like I said, they can be different depending on where you do interview. And at Oxford, you usually get interviewed at two colleges. So the first college being the one that you usually put down on your UCAS form, and the second college that's completely randomly assigned to you. And these interviews tend to take a very similar format to the tutorials, as they're known as in Oxford, or supervisions, as they're known as in Cambridge. So what these tutorials or supervisions are essentially the cornerstone to your learning in this medicine course, as they basically take the form of small group teaching with your tutors, and in groups of maybe around 4 to sometimes 8 or 10 being the maximum. I'm assuming in Cambridge they usually have bigger groups, but essentially these tutorials or these supervisions are avenues for you to get very close contact with these tutors and lay off any questions you have, but also take away concepts that are discussed in your lectures and expand on them in massive detail. And this really helps break down any issues, break down any confusion you have, but also broadens your understanding very highly. But to be able to do well in these tutorials or supervisions, you've got to be able to think independently and think critically, and this is one of the main things that the interviewers want to see that you're able to do in an interview, and that's why they try to use this format to see how you're going to do in an actual tutorial or a supervision as the years go by. So moving on to some general tips for interview preparation. My first thing is that you should know your A-level content through and through. So most stereotypical medical applicants tend to go with biology, chemistry and maths for their A-level choices. And of these three, biology is definitely hands down the most important one that you should be knowing for the interviews themselves, as a lot of the key concepts that interviewers tend to focus on are the scientific concepts centered around maybe physiology, diseases, immune system, cells, and other sort of things that really tend to pop up in your biology content. However, that's not to say that chemistry and maths and some other subjects may not be quizzed about as well. I personally was quizzed about some statistics from maths, and to this day I still don't really understand it, but just go over your A-level content well enough that you have at least a basic point where you can start off of and build off hints that the interviewers give you. And the same goes for chemistry as well. I personally wasn't asked anything related to chemistry, but I know of people who are asked about organic chemistry concepts and stuff related to pharmacology. So knowing your A-level basics is a very big fundamental thing for you to be able to do to set a good first impression for the interviewer. And A-levels themselves, most of the content tends to derive from GCSE content, but there's some GCSE concepts that don't make it into A-level. And again, if you haven't looked at it in a while, it can be very easy to neglect. So make sure that you go over your GCSE content as well. If that just means reading a CGP book for the subjects, make sure you do that, just to make sure that you have all your bases covered. And this is especially true for physics, because like I mentioned, many medical applicants don't take physics for A-level, and some interviewers can capitalize on this and ask you about physics questions about maybe electricity or forces, and by the time you get to the interviews, you have no idea where to start. So make sure you go over your physics GCSE as well, just to give you a good starting base point of knowledge that you can build up of and work on. Aside from the academic things, it's also very important for you to be able to account for everything that you've written about in your personal statement. And why this is important is because interviewers generally tend to look at your personal statement right before the interview starts, and they'll skim through it and see if there's anything interesting that stands out to them. So for example, for me, I talked about doing a work experience placement in a cardiology ward, and I had a cardiologist interviewing me, and obviously that was a topic of interest for them, so they asked me for a good chunk of the interview stuff about cardiology and extrapolated from my personal statement. So this could very well be the case for you. And aside from that, sometimes they just ask you stuff from your personal statement just to verify that you've actually done it. If you've read a book, for example, they want to see your thoughts on the book just to see that you've actually read the book. So being able to talk about everything in your personal statement in a good amount of detail, firstly, is a cheat code for you, because you can direct how the interview will go if you know a big amount of detail about these topics, but also just to see that you've actually done what you said in your personal statement. And again, if you fail at either of these, it's not going to set the best first impression for the interviewer. So make sure you memorize your personal statement through and through. Aside from that, doing some extra reading and some extra revision beyond your A-level syllabus for some hot topics, some of which I've mentioned here, but I'm sure you can think of some others, can be a very big way of showing how you stand out from the other medical applicants, and to show how interested you are in the medical field and how much you enjoy the science. And a good place to start can honestly be Wikipedia. Some people don't like it as a resource, but I tend to think it's quite reliable and very detailed, and can send you into rabbit holes where you can really focus on your interests. So if you want to find out more about a disease or how a drug works, for example, look at Wikipedia and look at the sources they have on Wikipedia, and just build up a sort of base bank of knowledge. And it can be a very good place to start. And other websites such as the Mayo Clinic, even the NHS website, these can give you some more information about certain diseases or certain drugs, which can be very useful for you to know, both for now and going forward in your career as well. And moving on from that as well, reading up on recent medical news and memorizing a few articles, whether it's about a new drug that's been released or whether it's about a new disease or a new pathogen that's going around, reading up on that and staying well informed again shows the interviewer that you are keeping up with the scientific field and you are genuinely interested, and every interviewer loves to see someone who's passionate about that. And finally, and most importantly, I would say, doing lots of interview practice is key to having a successful interview, because at the end of the day, this interview will probably be a fairly foreign experience for you, and the more comfortable you are going into the interview itself, the more likely you will be to be successful. So doing lots of interview practice with your friends, your family, even current students and tutors at the universities themselves can be a big place to start, and build up a lot of confidence and build up your interview technique. And moving on to some general interview advice, the main thing I'll say is starting with the basics and having a logical train of thought that the interviewer can follow very easily. So this is important because as a doctor, you want to be able to do this in your daily lives. So for example, you're talking to a patient, you want to be able to explain to them very clearly what's going wrong, what medication you're going to give them, how that medication is going to work, what side effects these may have, and you want to explain this in a very logical manner that the patient's going to find easy to follow and easy to understand. And this is the sort of concept and this is the sort of form of communication that you need to be showing off from a very early stage, and that interviewers will be looking out for very clearly. So thinking out loud and vocalizing your thoughts and having a logical train of thought for your answers here can go a long way in showing the interviewer that you're going to be fit for a career in medicine. And even though it seems small, it can have a big impact. So don't be afraid to pause and take some time before you jump into answering the question, because I found in my practice and in my experience with the interviews themselves that taking the time, even if it's 10-15 seconds, just to logically structure out a skeleton of an answer once you've been asked the question can really help, like I said, structure it out and show the interviewer that you're going from A to B to C, as opposed from just jumping to A to C, if that makes sense. So having a clear-cut structure, thinking out loud, starting simple, these are the main things that you want to be doing in the actual answers to the interview questions themselves. And if you're ever confused, don't be afraid to ask for some clarification or for the interviews to repeat the question, because it's always good to, get some clarification and continue in the right direction, as opposed to going off in a different direction and maybe frustrating the interviewers or having them, bring you back on track. So yeah. And as well as this, just some interview technique as well. Make sure you always have strong eye contact with the interviewers, and try to speak at a steady pace that they can follow you at, and they're not having to, either get bored because you're speaking too slow, or either have to rush with you and try to follow you because you're speaking too fast. Try and find a medium baseline that you're comfortable with, and try and speak at a good tone as well. If you get excited about something, maybe use some intonations just to, show off a certain part of the answer you're talking about. And some people like to use hand movements as well. Again, if they get excited about a certain point, they maybe move their hands to emphasize this implicitly to the interviewers, and again, that can help with, just getting the interviewers to implicitly like you as well. So there's many things that can be done with your interview technique as well to make yourself stand out, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the quality of the answers as well. That's going to be the main thing that the interviewers are going to consider. So yeah, starting with the basics and building up logically, that's the main thing I can say to you there. And I've also added here, think about why you're being asked a particular question as well. So what I mean by that is, every question is going to be asked to you for a reason, and you want to kind of suss out what that reason is going to be and tackle all those points. And this is going to be very apparent to you once I start going through the mock questions in the next slides coming up. So here I'll be going through a few questions with you guys. Feel free to pause after each question to think of your own answers or some points that you'd like to mention before I give some hints and discuss ways that I'd go about answering these questions and why these questions are actually being asked. So what you'll see is these questions tend to go from easy to hard, and the interviewers will prompt you heavily as you go along. But essentially, they will start off at a baseline of A-level or GCSE content and progressively get harder. So my first question here is, what is spice? So I'm just asking this again as a baseline, it's a fairly easy question. They want to see your interpretation of spice. They want to see if you can give sort of an out of the box answer to this, but this is a fairly standard question. A follow-up question that they can give to this is, what sensory processes enable this sensation? So this is now when the question starts to get a bit more technical, a bit more sciencey. And what they want to see from you here is, receptors, taste buds, and try and see how you vocalize your thoughts. And many people at this stage probably don't know that spice is actually caused by a chemical in spicy food called capsaicin, which interacts with receptors, the spice sort of taste buds on our tongue. And the interviews will probably give you this as a hint and maybe ask you how does the capsaicin chemical interact with these receptors, and see how you answer these questions. And a final hint that the interviewer may give you here is that the receptors on our tongue that dictate spice or that signal spice to our brain, they're actually temperature sensitive receptors. So they also tell our brain that a certain area of the body feels hot. And the conclusion that the interviewers would want to push you at the end of this question is that capsaicin, the chemical found in spicy food, interacts with these temperature sensitive receptors on our tongue and just tells our brain that a certain area of our tongue is hot, and basically telling us that spice itself is just heat sensation on our tongue. A follow-up question you can get now is, why are certain foods spicier than others? And again, you're just being asked that to see your understanding of how chemicals and receptors interact and your idea of concentrations. So that would be probably a hint that they could give you here. They'd ask you to think about the concentration. But essentially, the answer to this question would just be that certain foods are much more highly concentrated in capsaicin than others. So for example, chilies per gram have a lot more capsaicin than ice cream per gram do, for example, and that's why chilies are a lot spicier than ice cream. Moving on from that, you can also get asked, why do some people have higher spice tolerance than others? And again, I would take some time to think about this and think about why they're asking you this. An easy way of answering this question would just to be saying that people eat a lot more spicy food, so they're a lot more tolerant to it. But that wouldn't be a good answer. You'd want to break down why they actually do that. Why does someone who eats spicy food every single day have a higher spice tolerance than someone else? You'd want to talk about the receptors. You'd want to talk about potentially some processes that may be happening to the receptors once they get exposed to capsaicin over a long period of time. Talk about how they get maybe desensitized. Talk about how the desensitization may be happening. And these are sort of concepts that you haven't really covered in your A level, but they want to just see ideas from you, and you don't have to necessarily be right. They just want to see ideas of how these receptors could be getting desensitized. And again, these are things that they'll be hinting you, giving you prompts for. The tutors will be giving you prompts for, and seeing how you get along. And another angle of approaching this question as well could be an evolutionary standpoint as well. So for example, different people from different areas of the world tend to have different diets, and many people with South Asian diets, for example, tend to have a higher spice tolerance than Western areas of the world, just because they have eaten a lot more spicy food, and their ancestors have eaten a lot more spicy food as well. So potentially talk about how this could be something that's genetically passed down as well, and why this would be beneficial, namely because in areas where there are spicy food, you want to be able to have high spice tolerance to be able to eat this food and actually, stay alive. And this could be an evolutionary benefit with like the natural selection sort of thing. So there's many different angles you could approach this question at, and just thinking outside the box is the best way to show off how you critically think and show off that you are capable of being a good student and a good critical thinker and faring well with the tutorial system or the supervision system. And finally, why does milk reduce the effects of spice? So again, this is the hardest question of the lot by far, because again, this is something that I only found out recently, so there's no way they'd expect you at your stage to know this stuff. But again, just try and think outside the box. Think of what's going on. So if there's capsaicin that's interacting with the receptor and that gives a sensation of spice, what could be blocking that? Maybe there could be an antagonist to the receptor. And again, this would be a big hint that the interviewers could give you, and try and see how you spitball off that hint and how you expand the answer. But the essential answer to this is that milk contains a chemical, and again, you wouldn't be expected to know the name for this, but it contains a chemical that essentially binds with the capsaicin. And what that means is it's binding with the capsaicin, so the capsaicin can't bind with the receptors. So there's less capsaicin interacting with the receptors, less signals being sent to the brain, so there's less effects of the spice being felt. And that in itself would be one example question that you could get at an interview. So that here concludes our video for today. And so today we've generally just gone through some tips and advice for preparation for the interviews themselves, as well as going through a mock question or mock set of questions that could come up. And hopefully this video has been helpful for you guys and shown you how to structure your answers, how to prepare, and how to go about doing questions like these. And I'll be showing you more questions like these in a booklet that should be coming out soon. And hopefully I'll be posting some more videos talking about these sort of things. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out, and hopefully this video has been useful for you guys. So thank you.